Throughout the expedition in Vietnam, the U.S. military always dreamed of deploying troops to engage in combat with the North Vietnamese main forces on a large front, even accepting the possibility of a mountainous battlefield like at Dien Bien Phu. Recognizing this desire, the General Command of the Vietnam People's Army adapted their strategy by opening the Dung Nien Khe Sanh front to attract and hold down an important and elite portion of U.S. and Saigon forces in the mountainous battlefield. This created secrecy and surprise, allowing the revolutionary forces in the south to divide the attention and resources of the enemy during the 1968 Spring Offensive. Initially intended as a strategic diversion, the units at Khe Sanh, along with the entire B-5 front, executed a coordinated encirclement and multi-pronged attack, destroying a significant portion of the enemy's main forces, destroying a large amount of U.S. and South Vietnamese war material, and liberating an area with nearly 10,000 inhabitants. In this video, let's admire Khe Sanh, a military wonder of defense that the Americans worked hard to build to block the supply routes to the southern battlefield of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. It can be said that the Americans brought everything they could bring to Vietnam and put it in Khe Sanh. The Khe Sanh diorama in the White House. Since 1962, the U.S. and Saigon troops have built an air and ground base in a remote valley near the Vietnam-Laos border area, which has strategic significance because it is located near the famous Ho Chi Minh Trail transportation route. At the threshold of 1968, the U.S. commander in South Vietnam, General Westmoreland, decided that he had to drop delicious bait to lure the North Vietnamese army into a trap, to force General Giap to fight in the conventional style that was the U.S. Army's forte. This campaign was called Operation Scotland, November 1, 1967 to March 31, 1968, and received the approval of the command headquarters in Washington and Saigon. President Johnson ordered the Khe Sanh model to be built in the White House and listened to the briefing on the war there. So, in the Iron Ring built up the area bordering the North and Laos. In addition to the MC Namara electronic fence and a series of military bases such as Qua Viet, Con Tien, Dong Ha, Cam Lo, Khe Sanh was expected to be a magnet to attract the North Vietnamese army to use the superiority of firepower to destroy for a reverse Dien Bien Phu battle. The entire White House, the Pentagon, and the entire U.S. Expeditionary Command in Saigon focused on studying the Dien Bien Phu campaign. Both the U.S. Expeditionary Command and the U.S. Supreme Command realized that Khe Sanh had a fundamental advantage over not only Dien Bien Phu, but all the fortresses in history. That is Khe Sanh, supported by an extremely powerful firepower system that suppressed it independently from the outside. It must be said that the Americans built Khe Sanh into a wonder of a defensive base in the military. Khe Sanh, a military defensive marvel. Regarding the Air Force, the U.S. deployed dozens of B-52 bombers to attack every day, and the advisors even assured Johnson that the B-52 could destroy the enemy regardless of the weather. In addition, there was close air support from about 2,000 other fighter planes of the Tactical Air Force, the Naval Air Force, and the Marine Air Force, with a frequency of about 500 planes per day, operating both in zero visibility conditions and at night. Khe Sanh was also supported by more than 3,300 helicopters with radar complexes, including extremely modern types such as Skysport. Regarding the U.S. artillery, 16 self-propelled artillery pieces were deployed on the King's tracked vehicles, 175mm battlefield deployed at Karen Camp near Cam Lo and the battlefield on the top of Rockpile, 18 to 105mm howitzers, 8 155mm howitzers at artillery bases in Quang Tri, medium-range artillery support from the battlefield north of Hai Van Pass. The special thing is that there are also 105 Corfam artillery shells exploding in high altitudes, scattering countless fragments covering a wide range of damage like cluster bombs, mainly reserved to create a big surprise if Khe Sanh falls into a bad situation when facing waves of human wave attacks. Ensuring the logistics for Khe Sanh and the Naples supply method means that low-altitude Chalua is carried out by a modern-scale aviation facility to the point of perfection on large-capacity aircraft such as C-130, C-132. Westmoreland could also supply Khe Sanh with up to 600 tons of supplies per day. Meanwhile, Navarre could only supply Dien Bien Phu with 100 tons at most. From 19th to 25th of January 1968, an electronic sensor system known as the McNamara electronic fence was deployed around Khe Sanh to support air and ground reconnaissance systems. In addition, rapid reaction forces, including the 1st Airborne Division and the 101st Airborne Division, were ready to move in from the outside to relieve Khe Sanh. On the 15th of March 1968, General Westmoreland increased the strength of Zone 1 from the 38 U.S. battalions that the North Vietnamese Army had blockaded Khe Sanh to 54 battalions, more than half of the U.S. Expeditionary Force in South Vietnam. It should be noted, however, that among those in Washington who believed there would be a reverse Dien Bien Phu at Khe Sanh, not everyone was 100% certain that the United States would win, despite encouraging messages from the U.S. President in early 1968. Nevertheless, concerns about defeat at Dien Bien Phu still hung over the Oval Office. At one point, Johnson turned to his military aides and shouted, "Forget Dien Bien Phu," stood on his feet but got punched in the head. Since Christmas 1967, American intelligence reports had been pouring in that Hanoi had been conducting an extremely well-coordinated supply campaign. Transport, personnel, and naval traffic in the North Zone 4 and on the Ho Chi Minh Trail had suddenly increased on an average daily and nightly basis. The trucks could carry up to 2,200 tons of cargo, 8 to 10 times more than the previous time, and enough to supply a North Vietnamese division in combat conditions for 22 days. Previously, on January 11, 1968, the CIA's intelligence on the threat to Khe Sanh, the president's security assistant, reported to Johnson that the communists seemed to be using the time from now until Tet to complete the concentration of troops around Khe Sanh, preparing to attack this base on the day after Tet, with a force of about 20,000 troops equivalent to 4 divisions. Immediately, Westmoreland reacted. On January 11, 1968, he met with General Cushman, the commander of the U.S. forces in the 1st Tactical Area. In addition to the 2 U.S. Marine reinforcements currently stationed at Khe Sanh, the plan for the first reinforcement would be for a U.S. Marine reinforcement to arrive 8 hours after the order was given. The second reinforcement plan would be for a U.S. Marine Corps squadron to arrive 12 hours after the order was given. Westmoreland also ordered Cushman, in case of emergency, to follow the following priority. First, a brigade of the American Division to enter the Phu Bai area. Second, prepare to reinforce the 1st Tactical Zone in the Phu Bai, Da Nang, or Chu Lai areas with reinforcements from the 101st Airborne Division or from the 1st Air Cavalry Division. The supporting operations were the South Korean Marine Brigade that had moved to Da Nang and some units of the 1st Marine Division that had separated to deploy north of the Hai Van Pass. Some units of the 3rd Marine Division had also separated to march to the Quang Tri provincial capital. And the irony is that the deadline of January 31st that Westmoreland set and finished mobilizing reinforcements for the 1st Tactical Zone was the day that went down in Western history books as the Tet Gate advance that broke out simultaneously throughout the South. And the most ironic thing was that it included the places that these units had just left. This would be a surprise gift from the Liberation Army, creating a classic decoy for Westmoreland. However, it was still fortunate for Westmoreland that in the days before Tet, Wayne, the American commander in the 3rd Tactical Zone, an intelligence general, sensed the changes around Saigon. However, mainly because he did not like fighting in the mountains and the border, he asked to return to Westmoreland to bring the mobile force back to cover Saigon. Before New Year's Eve, 27 American battalions had returned to the Saigon defense line, while 22 other battalions were in the perimeters. Later, Westmoreland praised this as one of the most important decisions of the Vietnam War. However, Western historians argue that if the U.S. had completely fallen into Hanoi's trap by sending their main forces to sweep through remote areas, they could have lost Saigon to the forces of the Liberation Army during the Tet Offensive of 1968. As if to respond to the U.S.'s expectations, on the afternoon of January 20, 1968, the Liberation Army initiated the battle with an intense artillery barrage of Katyusha rockets and mortars on the Quezon base. The ammunition depot was set ablaze, the fuel storage for helicopters exploded, and the airstrip was severely damaged. Because he had anticipated the fierceness of this attack, from the beginning of January 1968, Westmoreland issued a series of orders to concentrate the largest possible U.S. military force to fight back against the enemy. Westmoreland also ordered all B-52 bombing missions to concentrate on this key area. And from here, General Westmoreland began 3 consecutive months of being on duty at Sochuanghui and not returning to his home for the night. The U.S. Quezon War also began from here and has consumed countless papers and ink up to now. In Washington, the U.S. president closely monitored the war situation in Quezon. Johnson, the 8 Joint Staffs, had to sign a letter in blood swearing to keep Quezon. Previously, on January 12, 1968, Westmoreland affirmed that Quezon, in addition to its strategic military value as an anchor in the west of the defense system, the border area also blocked the way to penetrate the coastal provinces. If Quezon were lost, it would create a significant propaganda victory for the enemy, demoralizing both the U.S. military and the South Vietnamese government. The U.S. military seemed to have shifted from purely military actions to a viewpoint that war is also influenced by political objectives. Seeds like this would eventually grow into theories that the U.S. did not lose militarily, but only failed politically in Vietnam, which later emerged in the United States. However, their opponent, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, was only interested in the final result. In Quezon, despite 40 B-52 airstrikes and 500 tactical aircraft strikes per day, the enemy still failed to launch sorties, Johnson worried. On February 2nd, he again pressed the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Willow, to analyze the mutual respect between Quezon and Dien Bien Phu. In response, the next day, Willow quoted Westmoreland's own report to answer the president. Accordingly, the combat skills and especially the weapon capabilities that the U.S. currently had in Quezon were much, much better than the French in Dien Bien. And the strange thing was that on this occasion, Westmoreland also asked for more C-130 aircraft, helicopters, more modern personal weapons such as M16 submachine guns, M60 machine guns, and M29 mortars for the Saigon Army. The reason was because the Liberation Army and the Southern guerrillas used new weapons with strong firepower, causing panic among the Republic of Vietnam and the U.S. Army. And even more strangely, Westmoreland also mentioned the possibility of using tactical nuclear weapons or chemical weapons if the situation near the temporary military line changed seriously. So what was the matter? Completely confident in the ability to win or still have the possibility of defeat? If sure of victory, then why ask for more weapons and equipment while turning Quezon into a defensive wonder? What a headache. Thus, the end of part 1. We all rely on the calculations and the perfect preparation of the Americans in Quezon. Let's wait for the main developments of this classic battle in the next parts, promising to be extremely attractive and thrilling.